Both Lisa and I sort of came across this at about the same point in time, but we came about it by different methods. That I think we all have Google Alerts is the greatest thing in the world for making sure you have no time, because you can read alerts all day long. Well, I have an alert that's anything that's published on gold, I get it. So lo and behold, one day I get this incredible alert about this great new book, right, called The Gold Rush. It's not about gold, but it came up in my alerts. Right? That's because it makes some parallels, so I'm not going to steal the speech. But so I get this Gold Rush. Yes, I went to college in the 60s. They're legalizing marijuana. This is my book. I have been waiting for this book. Rhode Island, yes. And then I read it, and it was so much better. It was just so much better than what I anticipated. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the author, Peter Hubbell. Come on up. And,
thank you very much, Mark.
We'll give you the stage. Much better you than me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
At least I know I sold one copy of the book, right? Well, this, Lisa and I were just talking earlier. I get asked to speak at a lot of these, as you can imagine, and the beauty of speaking at a Gold conference is I knew I'd have a beautiful audience. So you have not disappointed. So as long as you behave, we'll have a wonderful time together. But the topic that I'm presenting on today is the Gold Rush, Selling Gold in the Age of Aging, which is a build on the book that Mark just described. I am an advertising person. I started my career in 1981, a couple blocks up Madison Avenue. And after several stints at a lot of big global agencies, I recently started my own ad agency called Boom Agers, which is dedicated to the most valuable generation. In a day and age when agencies specialize in all sorts of very finite things, we are the global specialists in understanding the baby boomer consumer here in the United States and global aging worldwide. I say that not to promote the agency, but to make it clear that I'm not going to be speaking today about aging from the standpoint of a gerontologist or social anthropology or demographics. I'm speaking to you today about global aging from the vantage point of an advertising person. And advertising people are all about trying to understand how consumers think, because the way they think motivates the way they behave. Sometimes not thinking motivates the way they behave because emotion's more powerful than rational thought. But understanding how they think and behave helps us understand how to make them buy things. I think all of you are here because you're in the wonderful business of gold. I'm festooned in gold today with my beloved Cartier Trinity ring, right? And my Gucci loafers have silver on them, not gold, so I went without. That's just a way of background of the kind of orientation that I'm going to be speaking from today. So, for those of you, how many here are baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964? All right. That's usually about the number of hands I get. Right? You can probably relate to the fact that on any given day, I don't really know what day it is. I just go forward. A friend of mine who's retired from Procter & Gamble and fishes a lot with me has a great line. He said, the great thing about retirement is, he said, I go see my doctor and they do those tests where they ask you to repeat words and what day of the week is it. And he never gets them right. And he says to the doctor, he says, you don't understand. I am so happily, blissfully retired that the only way I know it's the weekend is when the newspaper gets bigger. So I don't even really know. I wrote a bunch of checks the other day that were from March. But I know one thing. It's not the year 2015. I know I have that right. Because if you think more broadly about what's going on, we're not living in the year 2015 if you're in my business or in your business. I think the only business that we are in and the age we're living in is the age of aging. And if you're not aware of what's going on globally, I'm going to take you through some facts. But it's probably the least understood, most important opportunity in the world, whether you take a slice out of it as business, culture, economic development, medical care, etc. Most of the world has their head in the sand on the subject because we're all human beings, and there's something about aging that we're all hardwired to resist and to rationalize in some way so as to convince ourselves it's not really happening. But you can't deny, when you hear the numbers that I'm going to take you through, that aging is the next big thing. So advertising people like me, we're all about what's the next thing, right? We got to get out in front, got to be on the trend. What's the big trend, right? Not only is this on trend, it's massive. So here's a gentleman who finished a marathon last year at the age of 100. Right? Wow. So when, as the caption says below it, when people are completing marathons at age 100, it's time to take our dated thinking from the last century and bring it forward and start to rethink things. In fact, here in the United States, in less than 5 years, 50% of the adult population is going to be 50 and older. You look at aging globally, for the first time in world history, we're approaching a point where adults 65 and over will outnumber children under 5 for the first time in our world's history. By the year 2030, 25% of Western Europeans' population will be 65 and older. We do work with Procter & Gamble. I was with their Western European organization in Geneva in January, and I said, you know, if you're Peter Hubble in New York, reading the New York Times and Wall Street Journal every day, you would think that Western Europeans' issues are related to currency and debt, and what the heck is going on in Greece this week. I understand now they're suing Germany for reparations for World War II, right? I said, the reality is if you strip it all away, and you should know this because you're here, your issues in Western Europe are not economic, they're demographic. Right? You've got, because they don't have the policies that we have with immigration that helps us to promote a sustainable population, they're shrinking, they're not adding people to their ranks, aging workforce, decline in output, you know where this is going. China, 200 million people who are 50 plus right now. Okay, that compares to 100 million in the United States, 200 million, and by the year 2050, more than 25% of the country is going to be 65 plus. So, you know, I got into this aging business. The last thing I worked on was I ran the General Mills business worldwide for Saatchi & Saatchi, so I got to do Trix and Lucky Charms and Cheerios and all that fun stuff, and then I took the plunge and said, I'm going to be the aging guy. And I was convinced in my business case, had a lot of smart people tell me it was a great idea. But you know, it wasn't until I launched the business that every day I woke up, there was something confronting me about aging that I hadn't seen before, because now I had hyper-awareness. So here I am coming to speak to you today. Open up the New York Times, there's an article on global aging. Some of you may have seen it but not realize it was an article on global aging. It was an article on sex education in Western Europe, of all places. Sex education now in Western Europe is morphing from safe sex to procreation because of charts like this. The dotted line is world average for people out of every 100 people who are 65 and older. Look at where Japan is. Japan is approaching 80% of their adult population in the year 2050 will be 65 and older. There are more adults in Japan today wearing diapers than there are children. Right? We just launched the Always brand into the incontinence category for P&G. In the year 2014, the number of women in the world with some type of sensitive bladder crossed the line of number of women menstruating. There are now more women in the world treating a sensitive bladder than dealing with monthly menstruation. These are massive. This is like the 100-year-old man running the marathon. These are seismic changes going on out there. And this is all great news as far as I'm concerned for you all. So we've documented that the aging consumer is big, but are they valuable, right? There's a bias in our business that says that a younger consumer is more valuable than an older consumer, right? It's a bias. It's perpetuated thinking, orthodox thinking, that older people are retired, fixed income, sitting around, waiting to die, not really caring about the way they look, all of these things. Well, I'm here to tell you that none of that is absolutely true at all. In terms of their value, those U.S. adults that I mentioned before, representing 50% of the population, 70% of the country's disposable income. They're going to inherit close to $15 trillion. Their parents that they're taking care of right now, the sandwich generation, right? Their millennial children don't have enough money to move out of the house. Mom and dad don't have enough money to stay in their own house. They've all moved into the boomers' house. What's that? Okay. All right, I have a new toy. Is that better? Okay. They're going to inherit close to $15 trillion. 25% of them say they're not going to retire. This whole retirement thing is sort of a quaint notion anyways, because it's nobody is going to leave their job and sit back. No, 25% of them say they're not going to retire, but the number of boomers, 10,000 a day for the next 17 years, are leaving traditional jobs. So what's that mean? They're going to come home, they need the money, they want to keep working, they want to stay vital, they want to stay active. We're going to see one of the greatest periods of entrepreneurial growth that this country has ever seen. If your Staples is having some difficulties right now, they need to start thinking about what's going to go on in the home. These people are coming home. I talked to Starbucks, I talked to Maxwell House. I said, Maxwell House, all right, these people are coming home. That cup of coffee that they used to have at the office or that they bought at Starbucks on the way to the office, now they're going to wake up, start their day in their home, and you are Maxwell House. And they're saying, yeah, but what about the millennials? Shouldn't we be making matcha, latte, cappuccino? I'm the guy that decided that I wasn't going to learn a new language just to order a cup of coffee. So the reason Dunkin' Donuts is growing is because all the boomers said, enough. Can I just have a regular cup of coffee? And my favorite in the world is Tim Hortons. Older adults spend $3.5 trillion annually, which is up 45% versus the prior decade. Big and growing. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Younger adults spend a third less than the boomers, $2.3 trillion. You heard about the delayed American dream? I don't know about you, but my American dream is to get a nap. But the millennials, for all of the aforementioned reasons, right? They're burdened in college debt, trying to find their way. I had a millennial son of a friend come to talk to me about getting a job in marketing, hosted him for lunch, and I said, so how are you thinking about your job search? What have you been doing? And he said, well, I'm identifying companies that I admire, and then I'm writing to them to see if they have a job in marketing. I said, how are you doing with that strategy? And he said, well, nothing yet. Okay, but that's sort of as it pertains to when you look at the way the boomers entered the workforce and so forth, very different set of values in this generation. They're delaying things. You probably know this better than I do. They're delaying marriage. That's not a good thing if you're in the gold business. Everything's being put off, the delayed American dream. If you look simply at when they were born and what we know about people's peak earning years and therefore their peak spending years, which is what marketers focus on, right? We're looking at the first of them entering those peak years not until 2020, and the bulk of them not until 2030. So my question to anybody in the room who's selling gold is, what are you going to do for the next 15 years? Now, I'm the guy that always gets brought in, let's have a panel discussion, boomers versus millennials. And I don't care to really have a conversation to pit one against the other, because they're two wonderful generations. They're both the same size. The millennials are the boomers' children. That's all good, all right? The reality is they have more in common than not. But for the sake of this conversation today, the simple reality is buying gold is a luxury. It's expensive. It's associated with certain rites of passage in one's life. All those good things for you are being postponed. Let's talk about boomers. They're big, they're valuable, they're being ignored. I was approached middle of the summer by Women's Wear Daily. Said they were going to do an article on boomers. I didn't realize it was going to turn out to be a cover story. And they were very kind in quoting me generously. And the day this broke was the day a large contingent of beauty executives from Procter & Gamble arrived in New York. So this is marketing at its best. So the phone started ringing. But the point of all of this is that cover story. Ignore them at your peril. $21 billion of potential for the beauty business. What do you think beauty and fashion is doing vis-a-vis the older generation? All right, but you've got all of these people that we'll go on to describe them in more detail, believe that they're ageless, They're doing things. They're not necessarily running marathons at 100 years old. But when we've added 30 years to life expectancy in the last century, and we're on trend to add another 20 years in the next 100, it's a whole new game. So they're being ignored. I built this case. They're really, really valuable. They're really, really big. Why are they being ignored? These guys over here on Madison Avenue worship at the altar of youth. I was putting together a presentation last year for a conference like this, and I said to my team, I want to start the presentation with some video. So pull some clips from movies that have some fun with aging and all of that. And I'll put together a montage and some music, and it'll just be a nice icebreaker. They came back to me a couple of days later and said, Peter, we can't find anything. We got some On Golden Pond, right? Grumpy old men. I said, no, I'm looking for something aspirational, something joyful out of Hollywood. Right? Well, Hollywood has an issue right now because nobody's going to the movie theater except us. We're not streaming. My kids say, can I have Apple TV for Christmas? I said, you have an Apple. No, I want Apple TV. But Madison Avenue worships at the altar of youth. And there's a fundamental reason for this, right? We are a society that covets youth. We all know that. The imagery that we want to be associated with as creatives is better if it's young. Creative people at agencies don't want to work on anything old. Grandma's house smells. I don't want to go there. Okay? And furthermore, if you think back, and for those of you who read the book, you will know this, as the boomers were searching for the meaning of life in the 1960s, Madison Avenue found meaning in their magnitude. Pepsi, the choice of a generation. Coke, the real thing, right? When the first baby boomer turned 18 in 1964, we didn't even have things like plastic credit. Color television was just beginning to appear. There were only 3 channels. So as 78 million baby boomers entered into this 18 to 49 cohort, they're responsible for the 3 martini lunch. Because all you had to do in the advertising or media business with built-in 15% inflation every year and commission paid by clients on top of rising media prices, with 78 million baby boomers like fishing in the bathtub, all you had to do was show up, have a long lunch, and go home. But 2014 was the year that the last of the baby boomers exited the 18 to 49 cohort. Now they're all north of it, so the entire industry is being forced to rethink the old models that were all built around the baby boomers themselves. So it's a bit of the fact that the boomers were the ones worshiping youth all these years, now that they've become old, they've become them, and they don't like that anymore. So writing the book for me was about evangelizing on this topic. The preface talks about something that was so obvious to me, yet not so obvious to other people. I wanted to get out there and tell the word. Jane Pauley enthusiastically wrote the foreword. Jane has been doing similar things to me in terms of traveling around the country and chronicling the lives of boomers who have reimagined themselves. Wonderful story of 3 women who moved away from the farm in the Midwest, and their father got old and was going to sell the farm, and they said, you know what, let's quit our jobs in the city. We'll go back to the farm. Dad, we're not going to milk cows. Get rid of the herd. We want sheep. We're going to make cheese. So when we talk about reimagining and all of these things and why the baby boomer generation, they're not stopping, they're just getting started. They're not getting old, they're growing old. These are the things that are happening, right? I should have been washed up in the advertising business at 52, and I'm going, great, I got a new idea, this is going to be awesome. I can be the advertising guy for aging people until I'm 93 and be central casting, right? And I feel better than I felt, right? I've got a 9-year-old son. This is great. These are the best years of my life. That's our mentality. That's why I wrote the book. The premise of the Old Rush is there's transformative potential to be realized when you prospect for business with the aging consumer. The greatest gains go to those who get there first, right? Part 2 of the book talks about the gold rush. Even I was fascinated to learn some of the things I learned. These weren't people who were hoodlums looking for something to do. These were farmers in New England or Midwest who dropped their plow when they heard there was gold, and they moved west. They had no clue what gold was, how to get the gold out of the ground, what to do with it once they got it out of the ground. okay? But they went anyways. They went anyways because the prospect for transformative wealth was so high, it was greater than their lack of knowledge, and it motivated them, and they went. So when I talk to big Fortune 100 global marketers, and they say, well, we've never marketed to the 50-plus consumer before. Ooh, what should we do? My response is always, get moving. You'll figure it out when you get there, right? Everybody forgets there was no way to get to the gold. The courage began with how you were going to get there. You took a wagon across the United States, you hit Nebraska by winter, and if the Indians didn't kill you, the cold weather did. Or you went down around to the Panama Isthmus, got off a boat, walked across the isthmus, got malaria, got on a second boat, and with a little bit of luck, maybe you got to San Francisco. When you got there, you still didn't know where the gold was, and you didn't know how to get it out of the ground, but you did it anyways. And oh, by the way, a lot of people who didn't go out there to prospect for gold made a lot of money on gold. Brands like Wells Fargo, they figured out these guys need to do something with the gold once they get it out of the ground. Studebaker was a wheelbarrow guy. Folgers was a Nantucket whaling family that took their whaling boats out to the West Coast, made a lot of money grinding and milling coffee to make it easier for hardworking miners. But the major point here is the greatest rewards, the nuggets on the surface of the ground, go to the people who show up first. If you're going to wait and see what everybody else is doing, you're going to dig and pan for dust. It's simple. It's a classic I call in the book. I call the gold miners the original first movers. And therefore, the gold rush itself was the original emerging market. I did a blog post recently for Huffington Post, and I was sitting on the plane last night with an investment banker. We're having this conversation about the next emerging market is not on the map. The next emerging market is demographic, it's not geographic. So all of that is prep. Do I have you interested in the boomers? Are we thinking maybe there's some potential there? All right, I sure hope so. So let's get down to this. Hopefully I can leave you with some practical advice as to what to do with all of this compelling information. Here are some thoughts. There's going to be 3 macro thoughts, and then I'll bore down into them with a little more granularity. The first is, it's not about selling gold. You have to get people to buy gold. There's a subtle but very important difference there, especially in categories that are irrational and emotional and style-driven like gold is, that I've always said people prefer to buy than to be sold. All right, we'll talk some more about that. Be sure you really know who it is that you're talking to about buying. The most effective way to be successful in marketing is to be crystal clear about who it is you're talking to and what their needs are. And so whether we're selling pizza or soup, when we say there's a mom in the food business who's a weary provider, you don't even need to know anything more than that to know what her orientation to food is going to be, right? She's buying frozen. She's trying to get food on the table, hungry kids, she's tired, she's multitasking, she's a weary provider. Fuel on demand, right? That's a person who needs something quickly. Quality of food doesn't really matter. Preparation of food, nope, I'm not investing any time in it. So this is an example. Again, we'll talk more specifically about why a clearer understanding of who you're talking to, how they think, how they behave is critical to your success. And if you think you knew how to do that, think again when it comes to the baby boomers. Because just like the 100-year-old man, we can't have the philosophies that have worked for the 18 to 49 cohort simply be rolled into the 50-plus and think they're going to work. And lastly, be sure you really know what gold is. I was having a conversation before about, carats and quality and all these kinds of things in jewelry. But there's something else going on that's pithier than the technical aspects of what you're selling. And it's those pithy things that will really create dramatic success. Let's take the first one. It's not about selling gold, it's about getting people to buy gold. I believe that you have to inspire to create desire. Some people believe, a lot of the clients I work with, that it's about creating demand. I literally had a coffee client earlier this week say, I need demand creation from you. Well, demand means you're going to do something that gets that consumer to want to raise their hand or be interested, and usually because you identify some need that they have. And the old saying in the advertising business is, if you can create a need they didn't know they had, then they'll buy your product to solve it. But in gold, I don't believe it's about demand or need. I believe it's about desire. There's a fire burning there that fuels desire. I also believe that it's about inspiring. A conversation earlier today, great presentation about seduction. I totally agree that seduction is part of the equation of getting people to buy gold. But when you're talking to the older consumer, I don't believe it's seduction and sexuality as much as it's inspiring their spirit. Look at those 4 letters, S-P-I-R, inspire, inspire their spirit. Right? This is the way we talk to this audience. Be irresistible. Right? I think you know that the right jewelry, you say, oh my God, I have to have that. We all know that's how it works, but it especially works with this generation because this is a pleasure-seeking generation. It's a generation that loves to spend, they love to indulge, and all of those propensities that have been with them all of these years get magnified as they get older, because as I like to say, as they get an understanding of the fact that quantity of life is decreasing for them, their emphasis on quality of life increases. We could have a whole other presentation about what's going on with home equity loans, how boomers are sort of draining IRAs and so on and so forth. But the good news is if you're selling stuff, they love to buy, and they especially love to buy that which is irresistible. Validate their self-image, right? Remember the Sprite campaign, which is the non-image image? It's all about, in these fashion businesses, I'm going to wear this necktie or wear the sport coat because it says something about who I am that I can project to others. Validating their self-image by putting your products in the right setting, in the right aspirational way is how you do this. Skip line, new paragraph. Now I'm dealing with a baby boomer who's north of 50. What do you really know about how their self-image has changed? It's changed a lot. And I always say, you know, if you're going to target the boomers, you have to remember that they're a moving target. They are dynamic, they are determined to be dynamic, and how they define themselves, how they see themselves, and how they buy products and services that match that self-image is a constant dynamic. Be sure you know who it is you're really talking to and who is going to buy. I always get asked, you know, what's aging? And I always give my own flip answer, which is, aging is when you don't recognize the people in People magazine. Right, the boomers, right? You're with me? Yeah. I also like to say that it's when you choose your cereal for the fiber and not the prize. That's when all the young people laugh, and I say, well, just wait. But when you ask the people who really matter, which is the baby boomers, what's aging, this definition comes to us by way of the folks at MIT Age Lab. It's defined as the future of living. Their orientation is absolutely towards the future. It's absolutely towards living. And when you break that down into a definition, they say the future of living is about well-being, joy, and growth. We could do a whole presentation about happiness and joy that comes in aging, but there's scientific proof, and I'll talk about it in my next book, that there's joy in aging that comes from the contentedness and confidence and happiness of a life well lived, the ability to reflect on it, but just an incredible amount of confidence and competence, right? So aging is the future of living. That's the first thing to remember and internalize, and that's the one that shocks most of the young marketers I talk to, because to them, aging is the beginning of the end. That's when you go to Florida, right? You ask the boomers about aging, they all tell you, I'm getting better with age. The older I get, the younger I feel. Again, if you look at any of the data from Pew, it's hysterical because the average boomer believes that old age is defined as 72, right? Average life expectancy is 79. So they're saying, I won't be old until 7 years before I die. There was a study released last week. What's the perfect age? Right? What do you think Americans chose as the perfect age? 50. 10 years ago, same audience said it was 41. So you see what's happening here, right? The closer you get to being old, the more you keep redefining what it is to be old. But they'll all tell you that I feel younger than I am. That's their alibi. That's their rationalization. That's how they get around it. Age is not a number. Come on, it's a spirit. I feel great. Look at this Peter Hubble guy. He's still got it. All his buddies in the advertising business have gray hair and they're gone, but he's still got it. So I'm not, the quote that was in the WWD that I got a kick out of, I forgot I even said it. You know, all these anti-aging products and so forth, the boomers aren't looking for the fountain of youth because they don't believe they're old. So back to understand their self-image. Where does gold fit in their life? How they see themselves? Gold is not a way to feel young. Gold is a way to reflect the spirit that I'm feeling and embracing. It's never burned hotter. I'm not looking for the fountain of youth. I'm not old. And lastly, speak their language. You know, people say, are you an ad agency? What do you do for a living? I say, I'm an interpreter. You know, what do you mean by that? I say, we have these irrational baby boomers who the older they get, the younger they claim they feel. They believe that they're going to live longer than they should. We have to understand their language, right? They've been on the receiving end of more advertising than any other consumer out there. They've seen it all before, they've heard it all before. It doesn't mean they're cynical. It just means they really want you to be pithy and authentic and demonstrate that you understand me. That's the highest order of what you can do in advertising. Demonstrate that on some level, I understand what makes you tick. So when you see a great car ad and you say, wow, I love that, it's a great ad, it's because you could relate to something in it that reflected your own life or reflected your own set of values about your life. Great quote from Peter Revson. Maybe you've heard this before. I learned this, early on in my career, and it has literally stayed with me every week along the way. Peter Revson, in the factory, we make perfume. In the department store, we sell hope. Right? So when I say be sure you really know what it is you're selling, Peter Revson's not saying I sell perfume. He found a way to understand what it is that perfume means to the woman who wears it. It doesn't mean that she's desperate. It just means that wearing a beautiful, elegant perfume that makes you feel good, right, opens up a whole world of possibilities. And so I don't have the answers for you in terms of what gold really is. I'm going to give you something at the end to hang on to. But this is what you want to do if you're in the business of selling gold. You want to try to get to this kind of pithy definition the way Revson did years ago. And last time I looked, he made a lot of money. What he was also saying, without saying it in trade talk, is focus on benefits, not features. Don't get caught up in the technical aspects of what you're selling. Try to understand what happens when people buy, because remember you're not selling, when people buy and people wear, what's going on? How does that somehow transform their life, either in the moment or longer term? What little things does it contribute? Because, as we love to say, the devil's in the details. Years ago, I worked on a campaign that is still running, 30 years, again, created at 38th and Madison, called The Best Part of Waking Up is Folgers in Your Cup. And Procter & Gamble selling coffee, they thought they were selling soap, right? And we had just come off of 21 years of mountain-grown coffee is the best kind of coffee. All coffee is mountain-grown. But this client realized that coffee could own some type of benefit beyond a feature of being good tasting. And by owning morning, the insight was that morning is the most optimistic time of the day, right? Right? You wake up in the morning, you got that list, you got all these things you're going to do. It all goes by the wayside by 9 o'clock. The same thing with Friday when you put together that list of everything you're going to do on the weekend, and then you look at it on Sunday night. Morning's the most optimistic time of day, and we were able to reframe coffee as day brightening, as a source of optimism. It's been running for 30 years. That's about benefits, not features. And as Matt said earlier, right, the allure of gold has seduced people for thousands of years. I'm here to say that's not about to change just because somebody turned 50, right? We got a long ways to go here with a consumer who's big and valuable and loves gold. So my definition here of what gold is, if I just had to take a shot, I would say it's timeless allure for an ageless generation. Right? We could spend hours talking about what allure is. Right? That's all that mystique. That's all what we do in the business. That's what you know better than I do about gold. But we're creating allure. Allure is about being irresistible. Allure is what inspires. And when you inspire, you activate the spirit. But gold is timeless. And the fact that you are dealing with something that is timeless for a generation that believes that they're ageless, right? No other generation believes they are ageless right now the way the baby boomers do. And oh, by the way, they happen to be the largest cohort out there and the ones with the money and the ones who love to buy. So I think, as I said earlier on, that you're in a beautiful place in the business right now if you decide to embrace what I call the most valuable generation. So just in summary, we established the fact that we live in the age of aging. We put some magnitude around the boomers. They are marketing's most valuable generation. I do believe that the old rush is underway, and the people who get there first are going to discover the uncontested virgin space and reap the biggest gains for the longest. When it comes to selling to them, you shouldn't be selling, you should be inspiring them to buy. You do that by speaking their language and by understanding that gold isn't just gold. There's something deeper going on. It's timeless allure for an ageless generation. Thank you. Great, well, thank you.